Ideas from the new poetry.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third installment of the Ideas from the New Poetry web series hosted by John Bernys and Leonardo Marcos, where we talk about how to infuse poetry and make poetry relevant in non-poetic forms of art. So our first installment about 2 weeks ago, we talked about poetry with rock music and the Velvet Underground in particular being masters of that. And then last week we talked about poetry and dance, poetry and choreography and bodily physical art. And probably for the most relevant, the most important installment, because we're living in the age of this digital takeover right now, is we're going to talk about poetry and the digital age, poetry and the internet age, poetry and the AI age, because so many there's so many ways we can use poetry as a force for good, but there's also so many ways that I believe, quite frankly, we can defile poetry using digital technology. And before I start, I just want to say this quote out loud. This had a profound impact on me when I was first getting involved in poetry when I was only about 18 years old. It came from Terence McKenna, who was one of the first proponents of psychedelic medicine using psychedelic plants. So he got to see some things most people could only dream of, LSD, DMT. But there's this quote that has stuck with me all these years, and I would just like to read the excerpt real quick. So it goes as follows. And I want to know what you think about this too, Leonardo. So it goes, "The starships of the future, in other words, the vehicles of the future, which will explore the high frontier of the unknown, will be syntactical. The engineers of the future will be poets. This is what virtual reality holds out to us, the possibility of walking into the constructs of the imagination." So that had a profound impact on me when I first read it. So the fact that poetry is the complete opposite of what a lot of people assume it to be. When we grew up in school, poetry is this kind of Luddite, kind of almost primitive literature. And then as and thanks to your work a lot, and I think you've done a lot of work, Leonardo, to help this reputation of poetry, you have made poetry relevant in futuristic forms of art. And it's kind of, now I think the world could be in a divide soon where you're going to have people that assume poetry is far in the past, where, and we have luckily had the experience and the exposure to believe poetry is from the future. So my first question is, so with the context that poetry has survived every single technological age so far. It has survived the printing press, photography, film, television, and the internet. So, Leonardo, what is it about poetry that keeps surviving technological revolutions that have always seemed destined to replace it?
I think that poetry is eternity. I think poetry is can't die. It's impossible that poetry die, because poetry is life, and the life is always repeating, for eternity. That you believe in God or not, we are there. We are a kind of infinity of in the movement of the time, in the movement of the world. And because of that, poetry is something that will always exist. Poetry is forever. It's impossible to kill poetry. It's impossible to stop poetry. It's impossible to lose poetry. It's impossible to get out poetry of the history of the humanity, because poetry is the humanity, and the humanity is eternity, and humanity is forever. And because of that, poetry will always exist, but will exist in several different forms. The same as we discussed last time about poetry in the ballet, you know, and it was, for me, it was something connected with the past, with the antiquity, with the Greeks. That ballet was a form of possibility to bring the poetry for the Greeks and the Athenians doing ballets, and in the same time they were, you know, doing a talkover with the poetry. So we never create something really new. In fact, we talk about new poetry. It's a good thing because it's important to have this word new. But in fact, new is past. For me, as I said to you, I am very influenced about the Renaissance. And the Renaissance has been exactly that. It has been the whole complete something new in the ideas, in the creation, in the science, in the politics, in everything, but it was just take from the antiquity of the Greeks. So for me, poetry has a future, and the future of the poetry can be done by many, many, many possibilities. This is really what I think. And according to the poet that you have read now, I think it's exactly the same idea of Rimbaud, of Arthur Rimbaud. Rimbaud wrote when he was in the school a letter. He was telling that poetry was this, you know, it was this kind of to discover the unknown by the whole completely deconstruction of the sense of the several sense that we have. You know, that's mean that to explore something new, to discover something that you don't know, you need this imagination, you need this hallucination to get involved in that, in this form of this construction of what you feel with your body. That's the way you look, the way you hear, the way you smell. You know, it's all this what create absolutely the possibility of to go forward.
Mm-hmm. And I think I already know the answer to this question, but I think you can give a very thought-provoking answer. So, since we're living in an age right now where information is more abundant than ever, but attention is very, very scarce, and you know, poetry is kind of all about paying attention to things. Um, do you think this could be used as a force for good of making poetry more necessary than ever?
You mean today?
Yeah, because we live in an age where information is almost overabundant, but you know, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. You know, attention is very scarce because of how much information we have access to. And, you know, poetry is all about paying attention to things and noticing things. So, do you think this could be used as a force for good to make poetry more relevant than ever?
Yes, I think so too, because in fact, the problem is not what the condition of the poetry. Poetry can be it's a flower can grow up anywhere. So because of that, you can be full of informations, you know, with internet, full of links, you know, full of many things. But in a day, you don't even have time for to read or to do something. But poetry can be anywhere. and can grow anywhere at any moment. And especially when you don't expect it. This is what I believe, and not only that I believe, but I realize that. But the thing is that poetry is not it's very paradoxical, because poetry is for everybody, but in the same time, it's not for everybody. It's very strange. It's for everybody, because when you learn in school, when you're a child and you learn a poem, you will remember. Very often you keep that in your memories forever, you know. So it means that the words, the lyrics of the poem is so important, because if it keeps inside you, same as a song, it's that it has been bringing to you something very powerful. But in the same time, it's not for everybody, because you need to learn, you need to go and to study that, you know, to research, you know, as you do, you know, John. You're looking always, you know, new things. You're very careful. You're always very intense, you know, with very special things, you know. And this is a work, and this work, not everybody is doing that. So it's the paradox of poetry. Poetry can be for everybody, but at the same time, it's not for everybody. It's a big contradiction, but it's like that. And I think that it's a good thing when it's not for everybody, and it's a good thing when there is a mass. Because more there is a mass in the world, you know, with all the links, with all the telephones, you know, all the things, you know, that disturb the way of thinking, the way of even can be the creation. But poetry is even need that, because with that you can imagine new things. For example, to be more concrete, I have done, as I said to you once, discussions with internet or with poetry. That's mean it was in an exhibition, and I put 3 of my muse of actresses who are playing in the movie, that you could see in the gallery, but in the same time you have a big screen where they were there in live, and you could discuss with them. Very classical, you know, it's something as we are doing together now at the moment. And the girls were there, but the thing is that they answer back, and they wrote with the computer to the messages only with poetry. And this poetry, I wrote it before. Of course, it was not so spontaneous, but they had a lot of archives of my poetry, and they could answer back easily. And they were the person who chose to answer back to a person who asked a question with one poem or with one verse, what I wrote. And this creates an amazing thing, is that people start themselves to write poetry. They start to write verse to the girls, and the girls answer back also with my poetry. And this creates a correspondence. And we keep this correspondence, and it was very charming. Because when I saw that people could write many beautiful things, and this correspondence was very, very special. You see, it has done with a very simplicity, done with a computer, done with things that we are using every day. But at that moment, it was poetry that we created the correspondence. The same as I did also with my telephone. I send often one verse, 2 verse, and they answer back with the same, with another verse. And it's so charming. That means that you can discuss only with allegory, metaphoria, rhythms. That's the poetry. And in this mass that we have, that everything is connected all the time. But you can also connect it with poetry. It's up to you to connect it. And you know, we talk about the velvet on the ground. I didn't talk very much about John Giorno. John Giorno was a very important person for me in the poetry. He was from New York. And he was a friend from Andy Warhol. He was even his lover. He was, you know, this guy who is in the movie from Warhol's, who is sleeping, something like that. And Warhol said to him, why you are a poet, why you don't try something new with the poetry? Maybe you can do some paintings, very short poetry, but you can paint with a sentence. He did it and he got a lot of success. But also what he did, what was very original, is that you could call a number with telephone. That was in the 70s. And we are not talking about computers, internet, all these things, you know. And the people could call a number, and then on that number you can hear poetry with a telephone. So poetry needs always this kind of innovation things, you know, and more there is innovation, more it's free possibilities to create new poetry. I gave you the example of the telephone, I gave you the example of the computer. We can do that also with other things, but I think that, you see, normally we don't think that a computer, we don't think that a telephone can have to do with poetry, but in fact it's possible. It depends on you, on how you use it, how you do, and can be also very important. The same as, also it's different, I know it's not poetry exactly, but I think that sometimes you can also, especially when I do an event, is that you come inside a place and you feel the poetry. You feel something very in the aesthetic of that. Of course, I use always that there is some news who give you a little paper, as I explained, you know, the last time with the church, but I did it also almost in every event. You receive a little paper what's written a verse, a poem, and you keep it for you. That's already bring you immediately into the emotion of the poetry, but also you feel it also with the aesthetic. You feel it also with the feelings when you come inside, you know, there is an emotion, not only with the words, as I said last time, it can be also with the ballet, and this is all the possibilities what it can be something new. For example, I will love, I'm not into that, but I will love, for example, with the EA, if there is a robot a little bit more intelligent, for the moment what I've seen is not exactly that, it's not bad, but it's interesting, but imagine that there is more higher intelligence, you know, with the robot. You can write with the robot and you can answer back with the poetry. It's very interesting that too. You can create also a correspondence with that robot, you know, and this is also new possibilities with the IA. Also the same, you can have an hologram. I would love to create an hologram, you know, what send that you can put in a place and is telling me poems, you know, and the poems that I wrote, and it's doing a talkover, you know, and all this is new, many possibilities to do poetry. There is also a guy who did something what I like very much in the Tuileries, in the Jardin du Palais Royal, and I met him a few years ago and found that he has a very good idea. He did in the garden, Jardin du Palais Royal is a garden in Paris, and there was some chairs, and in the chair there is a poem. And on the chair, there is written a poem from Lorca, from Hamburg, from Berlin, from Baudelaire. And only that, to come inside a garden with all this sentence written, you know, or this verse written there on the chair, it's beautiful. And it already gives you a hope that poetry can be connected with people.
And where do you think, because one of the biggest discrepancies that I've noticed regarding poetry is that technology that is being designed today is making communication faster more efficient, quicker, cheaper, whatever, where, poetry has a long history of slowing language down. A lot of poetry is slowing down. It's stopping to take a look at things, reconsidering things in a very deep, very profound way that is not fast, that is not quick. So, let's see. Do you believe that? So, how do you think those non-technological qualities will stay with poetry, or do you think poetry will evolve with these connotations that come with technology?
It's the same. I think, poetry can be, of course, a big reflection of the inside of the brain, and need time to get out, need time to get inspiration, need time to be in the perfect place to feel something. That's true. And the fact that it is slow is normal. It's not slow. It's the fact that you need this time to feel something. And this is very important. But in the same time, the opposite is possible too. I mean, the fact that it is fast, durable, speed, it can also be poetry. I remember that, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the guy who did that, was an English poet in the punk time. And the punks in London, they have always something concept, but was always to go fast, always to be speed, always to be nervous, always to be in explosion.
John Cooper Clarke?
Yes, it is it.
Yes.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, John Cooper Clarke.
A very good culture. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, yeah, so John Cooper Clarke talk about poetry being fast, so. Yep.
Really fast. And this is very, very impressive. I don't know if you have seen him with some videos, but especially in Manchester, but it was really incredible. And this was fitting very well with the punks, with the urban cities, with the working cities like Manchester, in England, but it's a very industrial cities, and the same was with New York. I think that Velvet on the Ground, for example, there is some songs who are very quiet, are very slow, very peaceful, but you have all the ones who are there talking very fast, extremely speed. And this is the rhythm of New York, this is the rhythm of big cities, this is the rhythm of industrial world. This is the rhythm of today with all the things what you have to do in one day with all these computers and all these things. So I think, as I said, it's difficult to talk about poetry because it's, in a way, it's Leonard Cohen, going to an island, a Greek island, and very slowly, without anybody, just his girlfriend, and he's writing poetry, and he feels something with disconnected of the world, of the big cities where he was coming from, Canada, and to feel something very pure, connected with the nature. And this is what he wrote, and all the songs were very beautiful. But you can be also Lou Reed, doing things very fast, nervous. Mm-hmm. And, this is why poetry is not, you can't put poetry on a page. It's
that's how it's taught. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because of that,
because of tragedy,
don't put it on a page. And this is why poetry is very free, and there is so many possibilities. And this is what, as I say to you at the beginning, the conversation that we had is poetry is forever, is always, and it will never stop. Because whatever it happens, that you can be in a big city, with a lot of cars, a lot of mass of sounds, of You can be in a prison, you know,
Yeah.
and you can be in an island like Leonard Cohen.
Leonard Cohen, yeah.
Yeah, but you can always write, and you can always do poetry. So this is why I think poetry is very, 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 very special.
Yeah.
Because it's not exactly the same, you know, with the other art. And even if you write a roman, it's not exactly the same. It's a little bit more complicated. You can, but it's a little bit more complicated. If you have to paint, also a little bit more complicated. But poetry, you can be Charles Bukowski, you know, to be an alcoholic on the street, you know, without a house, nothing, and you write, you know, the poetry. And you can be Leonard Cohen in a little island with no electricity, almost no water, nothing, and you can write too. It's, you know, it's like flowers. You can have flowers even in New York in the middle of
in New York City, yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And and I think that's another parallel that poetry has with music, because I feel like music, even though they're slightly different, I feel like they're both the exact same when it comes to that they are eternal. They've adapted, they've survived every single revolution, technological age of humanity so far. And there's always been in this, I think the thing I've noticed historically about poetry and music is, I think as long as we've had those, we've had both of those. We've had poetry that is very fast, very simple, minimalistic. You know, you have, especially in Japan, you have the haiku, you have the tankas, and then, but then you have long, elaborate poems coming from the West, coming from China, and music is the same way. For as long as we've had Western music, we've had music that's as simple as possible, only a few notes at a time. But we've also still had music that was highly complex. You know, you have Bach with his counterpoint. You know, you have Gesualdo that, you know, didn't think of, he arranged harmonies in a way that was never seen until so he was in the late Renaissance, and his harmonies were never seen again until the 19th century. You know, we've always had, that's just another thing I've noticed that poetry and music has in common. You know, we've always had both complex and simple music and complex and simple poetry, as long as there's been time. Now I think something more thought provoking around poetry that I'm personally more concerned about is this mass technology that I believe personally is used for bad, is that a lot of it is used as a tool to distract people. Whenever you go on your phone, whenever you go on a computer, whenever you watch television, you know, there's commercials, advertisements everywhere, short videos with, you know, even magazines, you know, with these false titles that are just exciting just so they could grab your attention. That is something that concerns me, is mass technology being used as a tool for distraction. Whereas poetry is all about, as we've talked about over and over again today, poetry is all about paying attention. So what role could poetry play in a world of distraction?
It's a good question.
Yeah,
It's a good question, but it's a difficult question. Huh?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think for me it's not a problem that there is this mass and all the things. Of course, I'm telling you that, but in the same time, it's true that today people don't read anything, and they don't read, of course, poetry. So it's very sad, because when you take a plane, or when you take a train or metro or bus, you can see that people, they are connected with their iPhone or telephones, they are connected with many things, but it's rare that you have somebody who's opening a book and reading. And when you see somebody who is reading poetry, it's even so rare that you have the impression that it's a Martian. But it's true that the context is not good for that, because with all these computers, all the things, this mess, it's a destruction. It's a real destruction, I say, from so many things, and it's a big destruction also for, of course, for the poetry. But poetry is also rebel, and poetry is, as I said, forever. I'm an optimist, and I think that because I've seen that with the punks, in England and in France. I wasn't in New York at that time, but I could see that, even in the mass, even when there is no hope, because the concept of the punks, no future, it was future, because they bring in other forms of poetry, of the forms of to bring something new. And especially, we were talking about the Velvet on the Ground. Only Velvet on the Ground is very connected with Andy Warhol, as you know, and Warhol was like that. If Warhol was today living he should be very happy with all these things, because he was purpose. He will use that, for to do art. He will use that, and not doing that in a very conceptual way, because I'm not always very close to the concept, art concept, but he should do it in a very, like pop art was, he used everything to make art and to create art. That was his way of living, and it's a very positive thing. And I always thinking about him that moment, because and you never know. Look, Rimbaud, in those days, nobody knew him. Nobody, except Verlaine. Even Verlaine was not famous. Nobody knew these poets, But after that, they exist. It happens later. Of course, they didn't know that, and it's a shame, and it's sad, and it's the same for a lot of artists. But there is always something what is a necessity for the world to have poetry. And again, Warhol was really very good for that, to use all the techniques, all the things, commercials, whatever, use anything rubbish, to make something new, something beautiful, and to create art with that. And that's a very good philosophy, because we have to fight by that way. Because you can't, what can we do? We're going to fight against computer, against the progress, impossible. We are going to fight to stop the links, to be connected. It's possible. So the only way is to use that, even if it's an enemy. Do you know the words that I love from the Sex Pistols? We are talking very much about fun today, I don't know why. Because parents, they love Lou Reed. They said he was the godfather of them. And there is a sentence that I love very much in Anarchy in the UK, what's a song from the Sex Pistols is, I use the best, I use the rest, I use the enemy, because I am the anarchy. Wow. It's beautiful, because you can change. I use the best, I use the rest, I use the enemy, because I am the poetry.
I was not expecting you to bring up the Sex Pistols.
I know. So they did it purposely, because like that, because poetry is also that.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It comes from places you never expect, and it can. That's the important part. It can. I didn't know that. I didn't know that they idolized Lou Reed. I didn't know that.
Oh yes, Lou Reed was really for the punks. They call him the Godfather. He was, was not so. When the punks arrived, they didn't like anymore the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, He did not, because I love Rolling Stones and Beatles, and it was super. But they didn't like all these bands but except Velvet on the Ground, Lou Reed. He was the king for them, was the Godfather. Also Iggy Pop, of course, and also Bowie, also T-Rex body, they love it very much too. But the main one was Louis and the Velvet. They were the first ones. And I remember that I told you that in those days of the Velvet, when it was a band, started with Nico and all the things in the factory with Warhol, nobody realized that we were disconnected completely with the fashion and with the movement of that time. They were before. They were avant-garde. They were punks 10 years, 15 years before. Because when it was the flower power, it was California, what was in the fashion. They were all taking LSD. They were all training, and it was beautiful. And all like that, completely peace and love. They were doing the opposite. They were all dressed in black. They were black sunglasses, and they were singing songs violent. They were talking about sexuality in a way and in a form very cruel, with Venus in first. They were describing a world very dirty of New York, from the underground of New York, from the underworld, with people completely marginals, very freaks, and only freaks, and as I said to you, when Jim Morrison arrived there, Ray Manzarek from the keyboards of the Doors, what I love so much, he said, please, when he saw the Velvet, we have to get out from here. They are vampires, It was for those days vampires. We don't realize that in the present today, but they were completely out of time. They were not fitting with that time. They were the opposite. Everything was in color. They were in black and white. Everybody was talking about peace and love. They were talking about love, but in a very distortion way. So, yeah, that's really.
I think
that, and because of that, 10 years or 15 years later, the punks and the new wave and post-punk and all the people arrived also in the 80s, they start to say, yeah, there is one band who was there before us, who told everything about our ideas, concept, aestheticism also. It's the Velvet Underground. So this is why I think that to return to your question about destruction, it doesn't matter. You can have the apocalypse, you can have the end of the world, whatever, an explosion, you can have attacks on the ocean, whatever.
Yeah,
You will always have the poetry to fight. And because it's a rebellion, And as I say to you, remember that when was the Second World War in France, the big bandier of the partisans of the resistance was a poem from Paul Éluard. I write your name, freedom. J'écris ton nom, liberté. And this verse has been sent with prospectus, with papers. Even the English army sent that papers, to the French population, that they realize that they can be free and they can fight, they can win. And imagine the idea of the resistance was a poem. And it was the same for a lot of moments of the history, not only that time, but that's why I think that even in the worst time, even in the world, the most horrible things what can happen, But of course, I understand what you said, that it's true that the fact that there is too much computers, too much connections and all these things destroy a lot of things. But we have to create new things, like in the old things.
You might like this quote a lot, because you've talked a lot about great artists being either before or ahead of their time. There was this guy that he was a professor on media studies, talking about media, Marshall McLuhan, and I really love this quote, and I think you'll like it too. he said that all trends, fads du jour in French, he said that all trends are a rear view mirror. All trends are behind their time. So, so now on to something more serious. So throughout history, poetry has helped people make sense of some of the most simple, but somehow at the same time the most difficult questions and qualities about life. It's helped people make sense of mystery, grief, love, mortality, beauty. So, do you think technology has changed these fundamental human needs or not at all?
There's no technology has changed that. It's
Yeah.
just the human. I mean, it's has nothing to do with it's not the technology who changed the way you think. It's the people who change the way you think. I mean, the way you think or the way they want that you think differently. But today it's true that we have, there is not so much. I think this time is very conformist. It's a time very conformist.
Yes, it is.
And poetry is not conformist. That's
It's not at all.
It's not at all. And this doesn't fit with that. But doesn't matter. You can always have a transmission. You can have something new happening. I always keep very optimistic in a way, because
Yes.
It's quite important because I grew up, with my family. They were my father did the Spanish War and they lose, and it's difficult to carry that, to lose and to get in exile, to be outside your country, to travel, to be. It's not pleasant. But one thing is that the people who liberate Paris, they were the Spanish Republicans. People don't know that. They opened that and they took out all the Germans and all the Nazis. That means that there is always a hope. And this hope is very, very important, because I think it comes with a transmission. It comes with something that passes, in the feeling, and this can be possible with the poetry. We talk very often because you know, I'm a rock musician and also. And for example, I've seen they did a tribute to David Bowie. It was the 15 years, something like that, of his death, and or the 10 years, I don't remember. It's not important, but they want to make a tribute to him, and they asked some bands to do that. And it was the youngest band called the Molotov. I found that extremely, I got a lot of emotion when I saw that, when they played, because they were so young, and they were playing Rebel from Bowie. They were 16 years old, and they played exactly like it was, and this proved that the past, the transmission is possible, that you're not always with a dictature of the new way of thinking, today you have to think like this and not in another way, the morality is like this, not in another way, but there is things coming from the past, what they cross the wall of all these things, and that young people can, not all of them, but they can take something of that and make it new. And this for me is one of the things what I find the most emotional, to see that is possible. It's the transmission. Transmission is the thing the most important. I think that, there is a movie like that from French director called Renoir, from the family of the painter Renoir, and he did a movie in America not in France, in the time of the Second World War, and is the teacher in a classroom, and this teacher is not a resistant, is not a partisan. The resistance, they don't like him so much because he's a little bit, a person a little bit fragile. He don't have so much character. He's a bit weak, but it's an error because what he do is more than almost than the resistance and the partisan, because he's teaching to the kids the constitution of the French Revolution with all the articles that are so important. And this is absolutely the opposite of the Nazis, of the fascism and the Germans, soldiers. And you do that. And at the end, strange enough, they take him, the Germans, and to go to prison and to kill him. But the moment that they take him, he's in the classroom, and the soldiers come, they take him out, and the kids, they stay alone. And the moment that he's going away with the soldiers, the kids repeat all the sentence of the human rights of our Constitution. It's beautiful.
So looking ahead, 50 or 100 years, 200, 1,000 years from now, what aspects or qualities of poetry do you think are most likely to endure? And if you're comfortable answering, what are likely to disappear?
I don't know. I think nothing disappear, nothing appear. It's marvel poetry.
It may be probably the qualities I've talked about. I mean, my take would probably be the stuff that I've talked about, the whole learning how to look at things, learning how to connect things, paying very close attention to certain things. As I've said previously, I would say those would probably be for an eternity. So I don't think that's going to change. So
Yeah.
the energy around it.
Yeah, I think it will be forever. This is what I think.
Mm-hmm.
No, as I said, I think poetry is forever. Poetry is eternity, and poetry is life. Poetry is human, and poetry is nature. Of course.
Yeah, you would think that something that kind of that's almost like that surprises people is people think that poetry and human language are one and the same, when history has shown that that's absolutely not true. Poetry, every historical archaeological expert are all in agreement that poetry existed before the written language. Poetry was something that was performed, something read aloud, something expressed by the body. It's unanimously agreed that poetry existed long before written language did. So
You often ask me this question in different ways, but I know that for you it's important to think about that, to research about that. But yes, you're right. I think poetry is language, and language is something extremely diverse. You have much diversity of the language. It can be the body, it can be the way you look a person, the way you touch. It's of course it's not only words, not only to write. It's can come before. That's for sure. And all the research what can be done about that, they can prove it. That it can be that. I think so.
And my last question of the day, I think I've already asked you this too, but it's going to be a little more direct. So it's kind of weird because I'm kind of doing this myself. So and if like as always, if you can't really articulate an answer, I'll chime in and help you out. So if someone very young, let's say someone prepubescent or somebody that's a teenager, were to ask you in why poetry still matters in such a non-poetic age that we live in, a highly conformist age, highly distraction-oriented, not attention-oriented age, what would you say?
I don't understand, sorry, exactly your question. Can you repeat it, please?
Yeah. So if somebody really young, like a child or a teenager, were to ask you, why does poetry matter in such a non-poetic age? Because like you said, we live in a nonconformist age right now, and poetry is nonconformist. We live in a distraction age where poetry is all about attention. What would you say?
To a young person.
To a child or some, yes.
I think, my mother writes to me poetry almost every day, especially Lorca. There is an age from when you're a child. I think poetry comes by certain poems, it's different when you're adolescent, because when you're adolescent, like Rambo, you start to be the kind of you're changing. You start to be an adult. It's not yet an adult, so it's complicated. You start to be a rebel, in general, always. But when you're a child, it's different. I think what's important is to learn the poetry, even if you don't understand it very well, because it's complicated. But at least with the sound, with the rhythm, with the verse, you can always have the feeling of something strong and powerful. And a child needs to have some poetries that fit with his age, and there is a lot. And mainly it's not really poetry, but for example, all the fairies, it's already a little bit like a poetry, like if you take Alice in the Wonderland, it's poetry. Lewis Carroll is poetry. It's a lot. It's very incredible poetry. Lewis Carroll, I don't know if you like him, but he did poetry for children, but not only for children, but Alice in the Wonderland. It's marvelous. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And this child can, of course, it's not so I can make afraid a child also to because it's sometimes it's a bit dark. But this kind of books of poetry, you can start with that slowly with a child, and to bring that to a child, to educate him, and slowly he can develop by himself, the pleasure of it. As my mother did to me, slowly you discover other things, and there's many possibilities after that when you grow up, when you're adolescent, to discover other things. But for a child, you have to start with, I love the fairies. I think fairies, mythology, very important. Mythology, Greek mythology.
Yes.
Very good for the children.
Yes.
Sometimes it's a little bit dark, because I remember when I was a child, the story of Bernys, with the one eye, you get, like fear.
Cyclops, yeah.
I was afraid with that, but it's very good. Yes. Not everything of the mythology, because there is part of the mythology, but it's very dangerous, It's special, but there is parts of the mythology who are very good. You have fairies, you have in the folklore also traditional things, you can find beautiful books of that, and also you can start with the songs.
Yes.
It's also important with the music. with the songs. There is beautiful songs, for example, from the Beatles that I love, that they're very poetic. And no, there is many things, but it have to be, it's for the child, it have to be the possibility to open the mind. The main thing is to open the mind of a child. It's not to, I think, it's to bring him into the imagination, that discover things, with his brain, with the imagination, that he can build himself with that, and to structure himself, his mind, and with that. I think it's quite important. And I think childhood is the very good time for that, because it's the time that you can read books, or they can read to you books, the parents with the fairies and all the stories. So onirism is very good for the childhood. What have to do with dreams, all these things, I think to start living that in the childhood, according to my thing, is very positive. And you can, after that, you can develop that. If the child wants to write a poem with drawing at the same time, or you want to do whatever, with his telephone, you want to do something with his telephone and poetry. This is what I think is the main thing. But you're right to ask this question, because childhood is very important. It's very important when you're an adult poet, like novelists, like they talk a lot about the childhood, because it's a time very important for the poets, especially the romantics.
Yeah.
They were always due to the childhood. But childhood is true that is also the beginning of, at least society accepts more that a child can have some imagination. It's easier to be a child and to appreciate imaginary world than when you're adult. Because when you're an adult, you have to be confronted with the reality of the world, to be acceptable in the society. It's more complicated. A child too start with that, but he has the possibility to have his own place, to play, to discover things, and in this place is there that you can teach and bring the desire to love poetry, I think.
Yeah. And something that I think a good note to end on, and I think it's relevant. Do you know the American actor Viggo Mortensen?
I love this actor. I love this actor. But you're going to tell me more, because I love this actor. He's the way we already as an actor, the way we play is incredible. He has a physique, he has a beauty. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And he's also like you, multidisciplinary. He's a painter, he's a poet, and he made a point that directly connects with us, that I remember he was asked by a journalist, he was asked, why do you do so many forms of art? You do painting, poetry, music. And he said, I don't think there is a difference. Children don't really know the difference between different forms of art. Children don't know that music is separate from painting, painting is separate from poetry. They're all means to express, and more importantly, to understand ourselves. So I think that's a great note to end on, is children don't know the difference.
I would love to meet him. It's enough, I didn't arrive yet, but I would love to meet him, especially that I discovered that he's living he's living in Spain, because he speaks perfect Spanish, better than...
Yeah, he speaks like 10 languages. It's
Yeah, because he grew up in Argentina. So he speaks extremely well Spanish. And I remember that I wrote a script that I wanted to play on the script. I tried to find a way to connect him, but I didn't arrive. I discovered that he's helping so much with poetry. He's doing editions of books, and this kind of thing. So I will try maybe by that way, because it's in America. There is a girl working with him and doing edition or something like that. Or if you have a project of poetry, I would love to send a project of my poems to them. But because I have tried, by the way, of the script, but the script is different because it's not, you want to help, but not with the script or with the movie. You want to help with mainly poetry. So, but I didn't know that. I discovered that because I love him as an actor. And now I'm projecting to send him some poems what I wrote, and to explain him. I mean, not to him because it's difficult to reach him, but there is a girl somewhere, I remember, where you can, with the company of edition, you can send your project.
Yeah.
So we try, because I know I've not the chance, pity enough for the moment. I have a lot of connection with famous people, and friends, but not with him. It's
Yeah. Yep.
because I love to tell him that I appreciate him so much. And now that I discover that he is involved in so many things, it's brilliant.
Yep.
It's incredible.
Yep. So this has been the third installment of Ideas from the New Poetry, co-hosted by John Bernys and Leonardo Marcos. And very exciting to announce that we are planning on continuing this series. And we will be continuing every Wednesday to air new installments. And this has been John Bernys, your co-host. And thank you very much for tuning in. And we will see you next time.